Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down my top 36 wide receiver rankings and tiers for the 2024 fantasy football season. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you're doing up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 10 wide receiver top 36 rankings and tiers for the 2024 fantasy football season. We begin with the no-brainer wide receiver ones tier with my wide receivers 1 through 8. At number 1, we have Justin Jefferson of the cold like Minnesota Vikings going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars this week in Jacksonville. Going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense is one of the highest rated matchups for wide receivers. I believe this is a wet dream spot for Justin Jefferson, and I expect him to absolutely rip them apart. I understand that Sam Darnold hasn't looked as good as he did early on in the season, but even through the woes of mono man Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson has been dominant, 50 Shades of Grey style, and I expect him to bring the boom this week up against the Jaguars as a clear top 5 wide receiver. At number 2, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions going up against the Houston Texans in Houston. Now, this is definitely not as easy of a matchup as going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but with how this Lions offense has looked and with how surgical Jared Goff has been, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown belongs at the top. He has been a very consistent top 12 wide receiver all season long, and there have been some low lows, right? Week 1, wide receiver 71. Week number 8 up against the Titans, he was the wide receiver number 51, but I'm not going to panic at all. He has scored 7 total touchdowns over the last 6 games, and going up against the Houston Texans defense, while it isn't the easiest matchup on earth, I just believe he is going to see so much volume that it won't matter. Amon-Ra St. Brown is obviously a must-start matchup, and on Sunday Night Football, I expect a big showing. Next up, we got A.J. Brown going up against the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. Now, if you started A.J. Brown over the last 2 weeks, he has not brought the boom. He's been a He's been a big doom, and honestly, while at the start of the year, if you said, oh, A.J. Brown up against Dallas, you might be a little bit nervous, you might be afraid, you might be petrified, but by week number 10 at this point, the Dallas Cowboys defense is softer than baby shit. So while A.J. Brown has been down tremendous, I expect the Eagles to be laying haymakers here, and I expect A.J. Brown to go crazy. Next up, we got Garrett Wilson going up against the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. The Arizona Cardinals are another defense that is incredibly easy to manipulate, and I expect Garrett Wilson to go crazy yet again. He was the wide receiver number 2 last week up against the Texans, scoring the touchdown of the year, looking like the Jumpman logo in that game. 2 touchdowns, 90 yards, 9 receptions on 10 targets. Up against the Arizona Cardinals, this game could be a real rock'em sock'em robots high-scoring affair where they're going to have to pass a ton, and that should be able to elevate both Garrett Wilson as well as Devontae Adams, who, spoiler alert, is also in the number 1 tier here. Next up, we got Malik Neighbors going up against the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. Now, ever since returning from injury, things weren't as good as early on in the season for Malik Neighbors. He starts off the year wide receiver 32, his first ever game, but after that, wide receiver 3, 4, and 6. Then he misses 2 games with an injury, comes back, he's the wide receiver 42. Shout out to Jackie Robinson. Then he's the wide receiver 30 and the wide receiver 24. But if you've noticed a trend, he has continued to get better and better week over week. And up against the Carolina Panthers in Germany, while anytime the game is overseas, it does put a little bit of funk on the matchup. Ultimately, up against the Panthers, this feels like the get-right game for Malik. Next up, we got Cooper Kupp going up against the Miami Dolphins at home in LA on Monday Night Football. Now, the Miami Dolphins defense in the first half of games over the last couple of weeks has looked good, but for some reason they can't make any second half adjustments and get bent over the table in the second half. Cooper Kupp is coming off of a game with 104 yards, 11 receptions on 14 targets. So going up against the Dolphins in another matchup that reeks of being very high scoring, I think Cooper Kupp is able to put up yet another top 12 performance. At number 7, we got Tyreek Hill, who's currently questionable. He did get banged up in practice on Friday. This Dolphins team is just cursed. They are built on an ancient Native American burial ground. That's where the stadium's located. As a Dolphins fan, it's pretty obvious. That's why they're cursed. One of our key defensive players, Zach Zeiler, fucking got his eye poked at practice like Patchy the goddamn pirate and has missed multiple games. The team is cursed, but Tyreek, maybe he could do some type of seance and get uncursed, because this is the matchup for the bounce back. We've said it over the last 2 weeks. Tua hasn't really been forcing the ball his way, but here up against the Rams, again, a real high-scoring game. I think Tyreek gets back in his top 12 ways. Final guy inside of the no-brainer wide receiver ones tier is Davante Adams going up against the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. Now, his first 2 starts as a New York Jet, he was basically as useful as Mike Williams, right? Wide receiver 51 and 47, but he gets the monkey off his back last week, going 7 of 11. He picked up a Slurpee there and 91 yards with a touchdown. I think up against Arizona, again, it has the makings of that back and forth high-scoring game, and I think Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson can both coexist yin and yang style. They're going to do that thing in like Dragon Ball Z. I do not watch Dragon Ball Z. I used to play the game as a kid, but where the 2 guys go like this and they fucking form together, that's what Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams are going to do. And they're both going to be able to be top 12 wide receivers in this matchup. Next up, we move into the second tier here, which I have dubbed as the slightly lower tier, no-brainer wide receiver ones. Now, technically, Nick, you have too many guys for them all to be wide receiver ones. I know. I get it. That's how it goes sometimes, but these are all guys that are basically locked and loaded to be fringe top 12 guys, should be in the top 12, but of course, there's too many guys for them all to be inside the top 12. So Puka Nacua going up against the Miami Dolphins. Now, last week, the guy decided to do his best John Jones impression and slap the fuck out of someone on the Seattle Seahawks. And then he gets thrown from the game. He gets ejected. So his wide receiver 89 performance, obviously not good because he got ejected, but nothing to really worry too much about. I don't think he's going to try to fight the Dolphins defense in this game. The week prior in his return game, 7 receptions on 9 targets for 106 yards and 2 rushes for 5 yards. When Puka's healthy, you play Puka. Him, Matthew Stafford, and Cooper Kupp are a threesome like Mia Malkova, Angela White, and Riley Reid. So it's a dream trio there, and I expect Puka Nacua to get back in the good graces of fantasy owners after really just reaming us last week. Next up, we got Drizzy Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. He's been dealing with a hip injury. Now, the hip injury isn't from fucking us in the ass without the use of lube, because while he did get hurt last week early on in the game, he did score that touchdown, so it wasn't a complete and utter disaster like getting Earthshaker ulted in the Roshan pit. So Drake London going up against the Saints in New Orleans. Is this the best matchup ever? Fuck no, baby. But I do believe that Drake London should be able to continue his wrath, his reign as a top 18 wide receiver. It's Kirk Vember. Kirktober was great, but I think Kirk Vember is going to be even better. Next up, we got Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry, going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers at home in Washington. Terry McLaurin has basically been printing top 24 wide receiver games for a majority of the season, and back-to-back-to-back-to-back games inside of the top 21, currently the wide receiver 8 on the season. Jaden Stormy Daniels has been off of the chain, and there's no reason to believe that Jaden Daniels is going to slow down here. The only thing stopping Terry McLaurin from being ranked just a little bit higher is the fact that the matchup up against the Steelers isn't the best. Next up, we got Deebo Samuel. Now, I don't really trust Deebo Samuel at all. Now, the Bucs matchup is amazing, right? This is a finger-licking good matchup in Tampa Bay. But the problem with Deebo Samuel is you can't ever really trust him, right? When he plays well, he plays really well. He goes crazy. He goes nuclear. He could score 35 fucking points in this game, and I wouldn't bat an eye. But we also kind of know who Deebo is, right? He does the Houdini. He does the vanishing act. Sometimes he's in, sometimes he's out, right? He has these big games, and he has the lowest of lows, but without Brandon Ayuk, you have to just believe in the integration of Deebo Samuel in this offense. You have to believe in the matchup. So again, while I do feel like he's probably the riskiest guy in this range, his upside is too high to be denied. Next up, we got Nico Cousin. Let's go bowling. Nico Collins is back after being out ever since week 5 up against the no one circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills. He is questionable, but from what I have read, it appears that he is going to be good to go. Now, is this a great matchup to come back to? No. It would be better if he came back next week. Well, obviously, it's better for you that he's back this week, right? But in terms of coming back and just having a completely dominant performance using some fluffy fucking handcuffs there, right? It would be next week up against the Dallas Cowboys in Jerry's World, a belt-to-ass game for Nico Collins. This game, it might be a little bit slower. So again, there's kind of some risk with him coming off the injury, but ultimately Nico Collins is too good to be sat. Next up, we got Devontae Smith going up against the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. Now, despite the fact that A.J. Brown has been down astronomical, Devontae Smith has been fire. Wide receiver 13 and wide receiver 7 in back-to-back games with over 85 yards and a touchdown in both performances. Again, the Dallas Cowboys defense is incredibly washed like the last couple of years of Dwayne Wade. So I fully expect Devontae Smith to be able to have a clear top 24 game. He's a clear top 24 wide receiver every single week. Final guy in this tier is CeeDee Lamb. Now, CeeDee Lamb is coming off of a shoulder injury that honestly I thought could potentially keep him out of this game, but he's good to go, which is great for fantasy owners. The problem is the Philadelphia Eagles defense has finally got their ducks in a row, right? They finally figured it out. Early on in the season, the Eagles defense was terrible. They were a disaster. They were getting dissected Dexter style easily. And then recently, they've really started to come to form. So for one, CeeDee's going up against a tough Eagles defense, a much better Eagles defense than what they could have faced earlier on in the season, even though they have yet to play the Eagles yet. They play again in week number 17, but you get the point. If they played them earlier on in the season, the matchup would have been better. Plus, he doesn't have Dak Prescott. Now, Cooper Rush actually isn't as bad as most people would think. And obviously, while Dak Prescott has been reeking straight to high heaven, it would be better for Lamb to have Dak compared to Cooper Rush. And if you think differently, you're just a fucking idiot. So CeeDee Lamb going up against the Eagles with Cooper Rush, he's going to be fine. But again, I definitely want to temper my expectations because normally CeeDee Lamb's ranked as like this clear no-brainer wide receiver 1 top 5 option, whereas now he just kind of has to get knocked down a peg. Next up, we move into the wide receiver 2 tier, headlined by DeAndre Hopkins, Mr. D-Hop, my wide receiver 16, going up against the Denver Broncos at home in Kansas City. But before we talk about D-Hop as well as the rest of the wide receivers, before we get all the way to the end of today's video, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog and sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description, you will get your free pick, which tonight on Saturday is Kevin Durant, KD, higher than half of a total point. Plus, you will also receive a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. You're going to match the Kevin Durant pick with another player in the NBA or another player in the NFL, and if both of your picks hit, you will get 3 times what you put into your entry. If you put in multiple other picks and all of the picks hit, then you receive a higher payout. Now, you might be watching this on Sunday. The Kevin Durant game already happened, or you're watching it Saturday night after the Suns game already tipped off, then you will receive a player playing on Sunday higher than half of a total passing yard. So make sure you guys check that out. Promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Get your free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. So back on into things here. DeAndre Hopkins. Now, once he arrived in Kansas City, it was a slow roll, right? It was a little bit of snaps, a little bit here and there. You saw him catch the ball, and it's like, okay, let's see what D-Hop can do when they truly ramp him up. And the ramp up came in prime time, a game where we thought Mahomes was done for the season, or at least severely hurt, and then Mahomes just gets back up, and he's perfectly fine. So the guy fucking flops like a goddamn soccer player, but DeAndre Hopkins was amazing. 8 receptions on 9 targets for 86 yards, and not 1, but 2 touchdowns. Now, going up against the Denver Broncos, it's clear the come down's going to come, right? It's clear he's probably not going to be a top 12 wide receiver here because the Broncos matchup is tough, but it is possible because D-Hop is really that good. He's reached UNC status. He's not as great as he was back in Houston all those years ago. But he's still a great receiver with Patrick fucking Mahomes throwing him the ball, so you gotta like him. Next up, we got George Pickens. Now, George Pickens, his safety is so much better now with Russell Wilson under center. With Justin Fields, he was going all over the place, right? He would go as the wide receiver 24, and they'd be like the wide receiver 64, then 87, then 23, right? He was all over the place, but now he's going to be a lot more consistent with Mr. Unlimited, going up against the Washington Commanders that have kind of a frisky defense, I will add. This is another game that could be very high scoring, and George Pickens, his name is going to be written all across this game, so I think George Pickens, while he was the wide receiver 44 prior to the bye, he did look very good in that game. 4 receptions, 5 targets, 74 yards. If they could just get him 8+ targets, 7+ targets a game, then he's going to be a very reliable top 24 wide receiver going forward. Next up, we got Josh Downs going up against the Buffalo Bills. Now, it's very simple when it comes to Josh Downs. For one, there's no Michael Pittman Jr., and for two, it's Joe Flacco under center. When Joe Flacco is under center, you have to rank Josh Downs as a top 24 wide receiver. Sure, was he that up against the cold like Minnesota Vikings in Minnesota in prime time last week? No. That was up against the Vikings. Now he goes up against a much better matchup up against the Buffalo Bills. I feel incredibly confident in Josh Downs this week. Next up, we got Darnell. Here comes the Mooney going up against the New Orleans Saints in the NO. Now, if Drizzy Drake London wasn't going to play, I would bump up Darnell Mooney a couple of spots here, but Drake London appears to be playing, so Darnell Mooney, another guy, reliable top 24 option. He was the wide receiver 11 last week, wide receiver 13 the week prior, back-to-back weeks with 86 or more yards and 1 touchdown. He feels like a pretty reliable 6-7 target guy per week, with the upside of getting 9 or 10. I mean, he had a game last week, 9, and up against the Buccaneers back in week number 5, the motherfucker had 16. Now, do I expect him to have 16 targets again? No, but it's technically possible, right? So, Darnell Mooney, again, this guy kind of feels like a condom wrap around your team at this point in the season. Again, we talked about it with Drake London. It is Kirk-vember, baby. Kirk Cousins is fully heating up like that Young Thug and Gunna song, so I really do like Darnell Mooney here. Next up, we got Khalil. Shakira, Shakira, oh baby, when you talk like that. Going up against the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. No Keon Coleman, the guy is hurt with the wrist. Amari Cooper might play, he might not play. He's ranked a little bit later in today's video. Going up against the Colts. This is a barbecue chicken matchup for Khalil Shakir, as he's going to get fed 3 straight games with 7 or more targets. So even if he doesn't go crazy, he should be a reliable top 28 guy, but he has the top 18, top 12 upside. He was the wide receiver 35 last week, but prior to that, wide receiver 10 and wide receiver 18. I expect Josh Allen to look very good in this game, and I expect Khalil Shakir to be very heavily involved, and he might even be able to get over 10 targets in this game. Next tier here is the high-end wide receiver 3 tier, beginning with Tank Dell, wide receiver of the Houston Texans, going up against the Detroit Lions. Tank Dell is currently questionable with a back injury, but from what I have seen, it seems like he's going to be good to go. Now, Tank Dell really couldn't find his footing for a lot of this season. Stephon Diggs was higher in the target hierarchy than him. Obviously, Nico Collins was higher than him, and Tank Dell was kind of just picking up the scraps, and that led to his target share being all over the place. Games with just 4 targets and games with 9 targets, right? Last week up against the Jets, he was the wide receiver 14, 6 receptions on 9 targets. Very nice, I like, for 126 yards as the wide receiver 14. The matchup here isn't that delectable up against the Detroit Lions, and Nico Collins coming back could hurt, but it could also help because taking away the best coverage is going to obviously go on to Nico Collins. Hopefully, CJ Stroud gets out of his slump that he's been in, and that should be able to help out Tank Dell as well. Next up, we got bdge. Now, Brian Thomas Jr. has been dealing with that chest injury since, I believe, last week. In that Packers game, it was either the Packers game or the Patriots game. I apologize. I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny Sin, so I don't have the exact writing down, and it's not on my screen. But he gets hurt, and then they're saying, okay, maybe he's going to miss 2 weeks, 4 weeks. Maybe he's going on IR. That's kind of what the tea leaves are saying, right? And then he just plays up against the Eagles last week. So with that back injury, I'm not worried about him missing. I think he's going to play. The bigger worry here is it seems like touchdown Jesus Trevor Lawrence is not going to play, and that would lead Mystic Mac Jones to be under center. Now, Mac Jones has never had a wide receiver like Brian Thomas Jr. Now, I'm not here to suck the metaphorical penis here of Brian Thomas Jr. Be like, oh my God, he's the second coming of fucking Randy Moss or whatever, Justin Jefferson 2.0, right? I'm not going to do that metaphorically, of course. But what I'm going to say is that when you look at the weapons Mac Jones had, and you look at Brian Thomas Jr., it's not even a fucking competition. The Vikings matchup is rough, but if he gets fed, he'll be fine. But again, there's a lot more risk this week without Trevor Lawrence. Next up, we got the Ladd McConkey, going up against the Tennessee Titans. Ladd and QJ kind of feel like the clear 1 and 2 on this team. Ladd, number 1 in targets, Quentin Johnston, number 2. Now, Quentin Johnston seems like the guy that's probably going to be more likely to score touchdowns, whereas Ladd is just going to kind of, be the gritty guy. First guy in, last guy out, get the easy plays, the easy catches, get you like 15 points, right? That's what it feels like. The Titans defense, pretty solid against the pass, not so hot against the run, so I do expect a heavy dosage of the rushing attack here with J.K. Dobbins and Kamani Vidal and friends, right? That's cool. But the team's also now trying to throw the ball more, which makes me a little bit more confident in Ladd. Again, in this kind of range here, when there aren't 4 teams on bye, a motherfucker like bdge with the injuries around him, probably ranked lower. Same thing with Ladd. So, again, when there's multiple teams on bye, and also there's other teams that have already played on Thursday, that does affect the ranking. So I like Ladd a decent amount this week. He feels fine. He just feels fine. All these guys, there's risk with bdge. Ladd feels fine. Dell feels fine. Next guy, Juwan Jennings, feels fine. Now, no Brandon Ayuk means Juwan Jennings should be the number 2. Now, Ricky Pearsall has looked good in his debut game, so I wouldn't just say guaranteed that Juwan's the number 2, but it feels like he is because he's not the rookie. He's been there for a while. Now, he has missed a gazillion games in a row. He missed week 7 against the Chiefs, week 8 against the Cowboys. Then they had a bye week, and now they're up against the Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. He's been dealing with the hip injury. We probably won't know for sure till Sunday if he's 100% good to go or not. But again, with Brock Purdy playing as lights out as he's been playing recently, with the addition of Christian McCaffrey coming back, I just feel like the offense is going to be percolating. They're going to be able to move the ball. And I think Juwan Jennings feels fine in this game. To close things out of this tier, the high-end wide receiver 3 tier, we got Courtland Sutton going up against the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. Now, Courtland Sutton is coming off of back-to-back games with 10 or more targets and 100 or more yards, right? Last week, up against the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore in a game where the Denver Broncos really just got the ever-living shit beat out of them, right? They got beat lifeless in that game, like how fucking Conor McGregor did Jose Aldo. But still, fighting back, Courtland Sutton was able to succeed. And that's what this game feels like. Fighting back and throwing the ball a bunch, he succeeds. Now, it seemed like early on in the season, Bo Nix didn't really know what he wanted to do with the ball. Kind of throwing the ball all around. You get the ball, you get the ball, you all get the ball, Oprah Winfrey style. Whereas over the last 2 weeks, he's been like, okay, Courtland Sutton's my guy. I've always been a Courtland Sutton believer. I don't want to give Courtland Sutton the Courtland Suckton here and give him the sucky. But again, the matchup against the Chiefs is rough, but he should get a lot of volume, so that alone quantifies ranking him this high. Next up, we got the wide receiver 3 tier, beginning with Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, my Marvin Harrison Jr. breakdown is going to be very simple. Marvin Harrison Jr. is on a team that is bipolar. I talked about it with James Conner. This is a team that 1 week will look like they might legitimately be one of the best offenses in the NFL, and the next week they don't look good at all, right? That's just kind of what's happened. That's what Kyler has been playing this season. The Jets defense is incredibly overrated, so Marvin Harrison Jr. could end up having a barbecue chicken matchup here. Obviously, going up against Sauce isn't a barbecue chicken matchup inherently because Sauce Gardner's good, but he can make Sauce Gardner look like a little guy. Shout out Zach Bryan. So I think Marvin Harrison Jr. could have the huge game, but he also could have a terrible game. Starting at the beginning of the year, wide receiver 103, then number 1, then 20, 26. It's like, okay, he's found his ground. Psych, that's the wrong number. Wide receiver 59, 135, 58. And then it's like, oh, he's back. Wide receiver 4 up against my Dolphins. He butt-fucked us. And then wide receiver 76 the next week. Your guess is as good as mine with him. That's why he's ranked this low. Next up, we got Jalen Waddle away, Waddle. Till the very next day, that touchdown up against the Bills made me ejaculate in my pants. It was beautiful. I was so happy. Tua with the rollout. Throws a laser to Jalen Waddle. Chef's kiss, magnifique. But the Dolphins still lose because Tyler Bass kicks an 8,000-yard field goal. Jalen Waddle, Tyreek, both bust this year. Very, very clearly. Crystal clear fucking 4K bust here. 8K bust, okay? Like you see on the hub. But going up against the Rams, this feels like the high-scoring game. This feels like the back-and-forth game where Jalen Waddle doesn't get 2 fucking targets like last week, where he gets 6, where he gets 8. Again, this feels like the game where Jalen Waddle bounces back. I believe in it. I rubbed the crystal ball. I saw it. So he's going to be fine this week. You just believe it. Next up, we got Mr. Wiki DJ Moore going up against the Patriots. The same thing I said about Kyler is kind of the same thing about Caleb Williams, right? He kind of finds his ground. Week 5 against the Carolina Panthers. Week 6 against the Jaguars. He's on fire. He's looking great. He's looking phenomenal, right? And then they go in the bye week. It's like, okay, you're coming out against the Commanders. This is where we get, the Caleb Williams run. He's probably not going to win Rookie of the Year because Jaden Stormy Daniels has played so well. But man, oh man, he's looking good. This is going to be the time, right? And then up against the Commanders, he looks like shit. Then up against the Cardinals, he looks like shit times 7. He looks terrible. So that just completely destroys any confidence I have in DJ Moore. Am I going to play him? Yeah, probably, because he's DJ Moore. The matchup's fine, but why rank him higher? You just can't. Next up, we got Calvin Ridley. Now, I had Calvin Ridley ranked a lot higher than I did a rankings update. You guys can check out my rankings. They change all the time on patreon.com/NotoriousFantasy, I believe, or just in the link in the video description. $7.50 a month for other rankings and answer to any of the questions you may have. But Calvin Ridley was ranked higher. And then they say, oh, it's going to be Will Levis. And then I say, back that ass up. I back up. Wee woo, wee woo. No, that's like a fucking alarm. Beep, beep, beep. Right, we back up. You know what? We're not going to plant the flag on Calvin Ridley this week. Fine matchup against the Chargers. But with Will Levis, I have zero trust. Now, without D-Hop, he should be getting 8 or 9 targets guaranteed. But those things are going to be shaken like some ass in the club when no hands comes on. So I just don't think you want to rank Ridley much higher than this. Next up, we got Amari Cooper. Questionable. Missed last week up against the Dolphins with the wrist. He played like shit up against the Seahawks. He looked good in his debut game up against the Titans. Great matchup against the Colts, but we don't know how truly healthy he is, so that kind of just puts him in this kind of limbo range. Next up, we got I Want a Bad Bitch. Jordan Addison, right, of the Minnesota Vikings going up against the Jaguars in Jacksonville. Now, Jordan Addison is largely a hit-or-miss wide receiver. Now, if he could develop into a 6+ target guy weekly, we are going to be ecstatic about playing Jordan Addison, but it just doesn't seem like that's who he is. It really doesn't, and now with Hawkinson back, I just doubt that's the case. Last week, he goes nuts up against the Colts, right? 16 fantasy points, second highest on the season, 5 of 5, 5 for 5 for 42 yards, and a tug, wide receiver 19. Going up against the Jaguars is a great matchup. This is a huge matchup for Addison. So even with the volume not being very bountiful, I think he's going to be fine. But again, like the downside is pretty low, right? We've seen wide receiver 80, 55, and 61 out of him this season. Next up, we got QJ Quentin Johnston. Now, again, I do strongly believe that Ladd is the #1 in terms of targets, but I think Quentin Johnston's the guy that's going to make the big boom plays. He's going to be the guy making the big deep down the stretch, down the field type of play. 4 of 5 for 118 yards and a tug last week. Quentin Johnston's a guy that I wrote off after last year. I thought, you know what? While he was drafted relatively highly, while I did like his tape in college, based upon that shit tier performance he put up in his rookie season, I thought he was finished. I really did. He legitimately could not catch the ball. He has double the amount of touchdowns he had last season, and he almost has, or he has over double the amount of yards too. And this is in 6 games because he's been banged up compared to 17 games last year. Again, this is a team that's trying to throw the ball a little bit more. Quentin Johnston only getting like 4 or 5 targets does make things a little bit dicey, though. Next up, we got Jameson Williams. Now, speaking of dicey, Jameson Williams is the definition of dicey. Not only does he get suspended every 5 fucking seconds, but he also went from getting 9 and 11 targets over the first 2 weeks to getting 3, 2, 4, and 1, and then suspended for the last 2 games. Now, over those weeks where he was getting the small amount of targets, he was the wide receiver 115. Wide receiver 24, shout out Kobe. Wide receiver 17, shout out Ryan Tannehill. And the wide receiver 104 up against the Vikings. hit or miss. His last game was a miss. So based upon quick maths, pattern recognition, this one's going to be a hit, right? That's just how it works, right, guys? How it works, right? Yeah, definitely. Again, if you're getting 3 fucking targets, I don't trust you at all, but the upside's too high to be ranked lower. Final guy here in this tier is Xavier. Somebody touch my Leggett, going up against the Giants in Germany. I think I might have said London earlier. I think I said Germany, but I said London in one of the videos earlier on in the week. Get your crumpets ready, and people probably thought I was dumb. I am, but I might be stupid, but I do at least know something about football. Like, my brain, it's got a couple of things in it, right? I know how to do my job, my, like, actual full-time job. I've got a lot of knowledge about that. Got a lot of knowledge in the NFL, and then I have a bunch of porn stars and random ladies in my head. Just names to pull for these videos. Shout out Asa Akira, right? I got a bunch of random names. And then there's, like, movie knowledge and stuff like that. But most of my brain power goes to that. Like, I can't remember dates of anything. It is so embarrassing. I can't figure out the dates of anything. Like, oh, when's this person's birthday? No idea. How many yards did Xavier Leggett have last week? Well, he had 33 on 4 catches, 6 targets, and a touchdown, right? And he scored a touchdown in back-to-back games. But I don't know when someone's birthday is. That's just how my brain works. Sorry. But Leggett going up against the Giants in Germany feels like a fine game. He's been in a top 34 wide receivers in back-to-back weeks. Could be able to do it again, right? I think Bryce Young is fine. I think Bryce Young is getting better. But if Bryce Young was truly great, then Xavier Leggett could be even greater. Next up, we got the flex tier. And so basically how this works, in case you haven't figured it out, right? The top 2 tiers, obviously, no fucking brainers. Those guys are in your lineup. The third tier, you're happy about those guys as wide receiver 2. You're ecstatic. The tier below, the high-end wide receiver 3s, you're like, okay, you know, if you have to play them, that's good. Like, if you're in, like, a 2 wide receiver league, they're not the most ideal wide receiver 2s, but it's okay, right? And then you got the wide receiver 3 range, where it's like, okay, you want those guys in your flex / the wide receiver 3 spot. It's okay. Not the best. There's a lot of risk there. You'd prefer the guys above them. And then in this flex tier, it's basically like you're throwing shit against the wall and you're hoping it sticks, right? Rome Odunze, wide receiver 22 last week. Back-to-back weeks with 6 or more targets. Difference is one week he had 8 points, the other week he had 15 points. Now, Rome Odunze is very talented. I'm not going to sit here and fucking suck this guy dry here. But what I'm going to tell you is that Rome Odunze is very good. He might even be better than DJ Moore. He might be the most talented wide receiver on this team. But until Caleb Williams can figure out his ass from his mouth, we are never going to be able to believe strongly in Rome Odunze. Next up, we got Wan'Dale Robinson. Now, Wan'Dale Robinson recently has been on a strong decline. He is going because his targets have dipped. Earlier on in the season, he was getting like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 targets a game. That's dipped. Now, this game, if he gets back to his ways, his old ways of getting 7, 8 targets, he's going to be like a reliable top 38 receiver every week. He's not a sexy pick by any means, but he should be able to get you 10 to 15 points pretty reliably. Next guy here is Keenan Allen. Now, Keenan Allen is one of the rare. He's an unk, still got it. He's getting a lot of targets, 10 and 7 in back-to-back games, but only 6 and 8 points in those games. This game could be high scoring. The rookie versus the rookie matchup should be fun. But if Caleb looks like shit again, what's the point in ranking him higher? Final guy here, Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy is the definition of, like, in the running back video, the final tier is called the YOLO tier, where it's like, okay, YOLO, you got to play this guy. You're down bad at running back, so you start him. Xavier Worthy is the quintessential YOLO play. With DeAndre Hopkins now full mast, there's really no reason to bang the drum for Xavier Worthy. Because while he had 8 targets and 8 targets in week 7 and week 8, last week he ate and he ate till he can't eat no more. 8 times 8 equals 6. Or no, it's I ate and I ate till I got sick on the floor. 8 times 8 equals 64. It didn't equal 64. It equaled 2. 2 fucking targets against the Buccaneers. So Xavier Worthy's a deep down the field piss missile, nuclear warhead, Kim Jong-un from Patrick Mahomes. Touchdown. You get some fantasy points. Or you get -1 like you got last week. So very hit or miss. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button like it owes you some money. Fucking karate kick that shit like the Karate Kid. Leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. Check out one of the videos on our screen if you haven't seen them already. And check out Underdog. Promo code Notorious to get your free pick Kevin Durant KD higher than half a total yard. total yard. Yeah, he's going to go out there and catch a pass higher than half a total point, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. I love you guys more than you'll ever know. I hope you guys have a great one. Shout out Wayne Gretzky. As always, good boy. Check out one of the videos on the screen if you haven't seen already. Good boy.